The galaxy had been at war for years, with the Zorath Dominion slowly but surely gaining the upper hand. A vast and technologically advanced alien empire, the Dominion had crushed world after world, claiming star systems as their own. The Confederation, of allied species, a coalition of smaller, less powerful civilizations, had been pushed into a defensive position. The Zorath forces, led by Admiral Vreth, had outlasted and overwhelmed most of their enemies. And now only the Confederation's remnants remained to stand in their way. Admiral Vreth's forces were formidable. His fleet was large, disciplined and well-equipped, armed with the most advanced weaponry the Dominion had to offer. They had razed planets, obliterated defenses, and crushed any resistance with unyielding force. The Confederation had nothing left to defend itself but a dwindling fleet of aging ships outnumbered and outgunned, clinging desperately to a thread of survival. Vreth, confident in his impending victory, had made plans for the final assault that would wipe out the last of the Confederation's strength. Veldara, a vital Confederation world located on the edge of the war zone, was the Zorath's next target. Its planetary defenses had already been severely weakened by previous assaults, and the Dominion's forces were on the verge of launching the final blow to secure complete control over the system. If the Zorath captured Veldara, the Confederation would lose a strategic foothold in the galaxy, and their remaining defenses would crumble, leaving the Dominion to rule without opposition. The Confederation, however, had one last hope: humanity. The humans had joined the Confederation's fight later in the war, a species that had proven themselves to be surprisingly resilient and resourceful. Despite their relatively small fleet compared to the Dominion's vast war machine, humanity had demonstrated an uncanny ability to think outside the box. Their ships, while not as advanced as those of the Dominion, had used unconventional tactics to score key victories that left their enemies scratching their heads in confusion. Commander Alara Graves, leader of the human fleet in the region, knew that the Confederation's days were numbered unless something drastic could turn the tide. She had been studying the Dominion's tactics for months, looking for any way to exploit their weaknesses. While their technology was superior, Graves had observed that their strategy was predictable, almost rigid in its execution. The Zorath relied on overwhelming force, brute strength, and superior numbers to secure victories. But what they hadn't accounted for was humanity's ingenuity. As Vreth's forces prepared for the final assault on Veldara, Graves and her fleet remained on the outskirts of the system, hiding in the asteroid belt, awaiting their moment. The Dominion had underestimated humanity's capabilities for too long. They believed their dominance was absolute, and they were ready to deliver the killing blow. But Commander Graves had one last card to play. Humanity might not have the firepower to match the Dominion ship for ship, but they had something more dangerous: the ability to fight smarter. The stage was set. The Confederation's last stand was about to become humanity's first true test of combat strategy on the galactic scale. Graves knew that the fate of the war and the future of the galaxy would hinge on the outcome of this battle. With Veldara in the balance, the humans were ready to show the Dominion that victory was never as certain as they thought. The battle for Veldara had begun in earnest. The Zorath Dominion's fleet, massive and unstoppable, surged toward the planet with overwhelming force. Their warships, ranging from colossal dreadnoughts to agile battlecruisers, encircled the planet, beginning their final bombardment of Veldara's weakened defenses. Planetary shields flickered as the Dominion's weaponry rained down, and the Confederation forces, vastly outnumbered and outgunned, struggled to hold their ground. The Zorath were certain that this would be the end, that Veldara would fall within hours and the Confederation would finally be broken. But Commander Alara Graves had other plans. Hidden within the asteroid fields of the Veldara system, the human fleet lay in wait, its ships barely detectable against the rocky debris of the belt. For weeks, Graves had been observing the Dominion's tactics and movements, learning their patterns and mapping the system's gravitational anomalies. She had carefully planned an ambush that would exploit every advantage she could find. The Dominion had underestimated humanity, writing off their forces as small and irrelevant. But Graves knew that this battle would show just how dangerous a small creative fleet could be. As the Dominion closed in on the planet, their confidence high, Alara signaled her fleet to move. The first step was to break their predictable formation, and sow confusion. Humanity's ships, despite being smaller and less heavily armed, had one crucial advantage: speed and maneuverability. While the Zorath fleet relied on massive ships that could dish out enormous damage, they lacked the agility to deal with unexpected tactics. The human ships burst from the asteroid belt in a coordinated strike, engaging in hit-and-run tactics. That baffled the Zorath. Alara's fleet darted between the asteroids, using their smaller size and nimble design to avoid direct confrontation with the larger Dominion vessels. They used the system's gravitational wells to create unexpected slingshot effects, boosting their speed and throwing off Zorath targeting systems. The Dominion ships, used to the straightforward head-on battles they favored, struggled to adapt to the unpredictable moves of humanity's forces. The humans weren't just relying on agility, they were also using unconventional weapons. Alara's ships were equipped with specialized EMP pulses designed to disable the Zorath's communication systems. One by one, Dominion vessels began to lose contact with their command ships, their officers scrambling to regain control. The Zorath were notorious for their hierarchical command structure, and without communication between their ships, they faltered. Chaos spread through the Dominion's fleet, and Admiral Vreth, who had long prided himself on his tactical superiority, found himself unable to respond to the rapidly changing battlefield. The human fleet didn't stop there. They deployed decoy drones that mimicked the signatures of their larger warships, leading Zorath ships into false engagements. Meanwhile, the humans launched devastating surprise attacks on the Dominion's supply lines, taking out key resupply ships and rendering the Dominion's larger warships vulnerable. Vreth's frustration grew as his forces began to unravel, with human ships emerging from seemingly nowhere to strike at the heart of his fleet. The battle shifted in ways that the Dominion could not have predicted. Every time the Zorath thought they had outflanked the humans, they would find their flanks compromised by clever tactics or unexpected human maneuvers. The Zorath were caught between the brute force they had relied on for so long and the innovative, adaptable combat strategies of humanity, a species they had long written off as inferior. Admiral Vreth, once confident of his victory, now found himself on the defensive. His fleet, initially brimming with confidence, was now disorganized and reeling from the unexpected onslaught. What was supposed to be a quick and decisive victory for the Dominion was rapidly turning into a nightmare. The arrival of the human fleet had injected a level of unpredictability into the battle that was proving to be the Zorath's undoing. The tide of the battle had shifted, but the war was far from won. Despite the devastating damage humanity's fleet had inflicted upon the Zorath, the Dominion was not about to give up so easily. Admiral Vreth, though shaken by the unforeseen resistance, was a seasoned commander. His forces, though disrupted and reeling from the initial surprise, began to regroup, turning their focus toward eliminating the human threat once and for all. The battle for Veldara was now a brutal, high-stakes engagement where the outcome hung in the balance. Commander Alara Graves knew that humanity's victory was not guaranteed. Though the Dominion's forces had been thrown into disarray, they were still a formidable foe, and the human fleet had suffered significant losses. Their ships, though agile and unpredictable, lacked the raw firepower of the Zorath warships. They couldn't afford to get caught in prolonged engagements, or their strength would quickly be whittled away. The human fleet had to press the advantage, while it still could. As the battle raged on, the Dominion began to adapt to humanity's tactics. They reorganized their fleet, re-established communication channels, and shifted to a more defensive posture. Rather than pursuing their previous strategy of overwhelming force, they began to focus on systematically neutralizing the human fleet. They launched precision strikes on key human vessels, targeting their command ships and critical systems. The Zorath's capital ships, once slow and cumbersome, now moved with greater coordination, leveraging their superior firepower to pick off the more vulnerable human ships. However, Alara had anticipated this. She understood that the key to victory was not in brute force, but in maintaining the initiative. The human fleet continued to outmaneuver the Zorath, drawing them into tight pockets where the Dominion's larger ships struggled to navigate. Ilara ordered her fleet to concentrate fire on the Zorath's weaker points, shield generators, power cores, and weapon systems, delivering devastating strikes that further disrupted their cohesion. The Zorath fleet, once a well-oiled war machine, began to splinter as their key vessels sustained critical damage. Despite the ongoing losses, the human fleet fought with relentless precision, using guerrilla tactics and employing all the lessons they had learned from years of fighting smaller, more agile battles. Each strike they launched was designed not only to cause damage but to send a message. Humanity could not be beaten by the sheer might of the Dominion. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the Zorath had underestimated them at their peril. Admiral Vreth, now deeply frustrated, took a more direct approach, abandoning his previous caution. He ordered a full-scale assault on the remaining human ships, hoping that a decisive blow would bring the fight to an end. This, however, played into Ilara's hands. She had anticipated Vreth's move and had prepared a final trap. Using the system's asteroid fields to her advantage once again, she lured the Dominion ships into a narrow channel where their size and firepower were neutralized by the dense environment. As the Dominion forces pushed deeper into the asteroid belt, they found themselves unable to maneuver, unable to coordinate effectively. Humanity's fleet, though battered, was still able to dart in and out of the chaos, taking advantage of every weakness. The human ships' smaller profiles and speed were perfect for guerrilla-style combat, allowing them to launch hit-and-run attacks that continued to disrupt the Dominion's efforts. The Zorath fleet, once so confident, was now trapped in a deadly dance of cat and mouse, unable to escape the reach of humanity's relentless strikes. Admiral Vreth, realizing that he had lost the initiative, began to pull back, ordering a retreat. But it was too late. The human fleet had already inflicted enough damage to cripple the Dominion's efforts, and the Confederation's forces, inspired by the unexpected turn of events, began to regroup and counterattack. The battle for Veldara, which had seemed all but lost, was now a shining example of how ingenuity and strategy could turn the tide of war. The Zorath, despite their might, had been outplayed by a fleet they had once written off as insignificant. The victory was not just a military success, it was a statement that humanity, against all odds, could be a force that shaped the future of the galaxy. The battle for Veldara had come to a close, and the results were nothing short of miraculous. Humanity's fleet, though battered and bruised, had successfully turned the tide against the Zorath Dominion, securing a crucial victory for the Confederation. The Dominion's once unstoppable war machine had been thrown into disarray, and their forces were forced to retreat, leaving Veldara in the hands of the Confederation. However, while the battle was won, the war was far from over, and the price of victory weighed heavily on Commander Ilara Graves and her crew. In the aftermath of the battle, Ilara surveyed the damage. The human fleet had sustained significant losses. Several of their ships were destroyed or severely damaged, and many of their best officers had been injured or killed. Despite the victory, the human fleet was in no condition to immediately press on with another campaign. For now, they had to lick their wounds, regroup, and recover. However, the morale boost from their unexpected success against the Dominion was undeniable. It had shown the galaxy that humanity was not a small, insignificant species to be brushed aside. It was a force to be reckoned with. As the Zorath withdrew, Admiral Vreth's retreat was a bitter one. The Dominion had not been defeated, but they had suffered a humiliating blow. Vreth, once confident that the Confederation's resistance would crumble under the weight of his fleet, now had to face the reality that humanity had brought something entirely new to the galactic stage, creative, unpredictable warfare that the Dominion had never anticipated. His pride had been wounded, and though the Zorath would regroup and lick their wounds, they were no longer the unquestioned superpower of the galaxy. The Confederation had gained a new hope, and with humanity's involvement, that hope was only growing stronger. The Confederation's leadership, once on the verge of surrender, now had renewed confidence. The success of humanity's fleet on Veldara proved that the war was not lost, that victory could still be achieved. The Confederation's forces, reinvigorated by the human fleet's ingenuity and determination, began to mobilize, planning for the next phase of the war. Though the Dominion was far from defeated, the balance of power had shifted. The once overwhelming advantage of the Zorath was now in question. The Confederation, and particularly humanity, had proven they could take the fight to the Dominion on a level playing field. Commander Graves, however, knew the war was far from won. The Dominion would not take this defeat lying down. In the coming months, Vreth would undoubtedly launch another assault, one that would aim to regain their lost ground and crush the morale of the newly emboldened Confederation. But the events of Veldara had shown that humanity was capable of facing the odds and emerging victorious. Even if the Dominion brought their full might to bear once more, humanity would be ready. They had demonstrated their ability to think and fight outside the box, using every tool at their disposal to outsmart their foes. For Alara, though, the most significant takeaway was the galvanization of the Confederation. Humanity's victory over the Zorath had proven that even the most seemingly invincible foe could be defeated with the right tactics. The Confederation now had the resolve to continue the war, and humanity's role in the Alliance had cemented their place as an essential player in the galaxy's future. The victory at Veldara had sparked a new era of hope, not just for the Confederation, but for all the oppressed species in the galaxy who had long been subjugated by the Dominion's tyranny. Admiral Vreth, though licking his wounds, was not done. The Zorath would regroup and the war would continue. But the message was clear. Humanity was no longer the underdog. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the galaxy had just witnessed the first spark of a fire that could change everything. The Confederation's victory at Veldara, led by humanity, had proven that with creativity, determination, and a willingness to fight against the odds, anything was possible. The galaxy was about to change, and humanity would be at the center of it.